Okay, so now we have all of our blocks sewn, and I have such a pretty variety of blocks here. So now what we're going to do is take all of these blocks and organize them into the top of our quilt. So I like to do that in a space where I have enough room to lay them out and be able to see them all at once, and that is on my floor. You may have a towel that's big, or a table that's big enough, or you may want to lay them out on your bed. It just depends on how big your quilt is going to be. So yeah, let's get started on that. Okay, so I'm getting the quilt all laid out here, and I chose to take these blocks and do a row of 6 across on top, and then I'm going to go 8 down. And I'm doing this because each of these individual blocks we sewed is about 9 inches. So if I go 6 across, I'm going to be at 54 inches across after all the seam allowances and everything. And if I go 8 down, it'll be about 72 inches after I consider all of the seam allowances. And that sounds like a good throw blanket size to me for this quilt. So just keep those measurements in mind, that these are about a 9-inch block for when you're putting your quilt together. So right now I'm not really paying attention to how close some of these matching blocks are. I'm just getting my blocks laid out in the size that I'm going to be working with, so that I can stand up, look at it, and see what kind of needs to be moved around and worked on to make my quilt work and make it visually pleasing to my eye. I just find it easier to do that than having a stack of blocks and trying to work as I go. Just being able to stand and look at everything at once is much easier for me. But of course, this is going to be your quilt, so do this step however you like. This is just what works for me, having it all laid out. Okay, so a few things that you may notice. There are a lot of really light blocks through here that stand out a lot, and then some darker around and above it. So definitely a lot of moving around that I'm going to have to do. And I also have some extra blocks here that I sewed because I just went ahead and sewed all of them. So I may lay a few of those out so I can look at them as I move my blocks that are in the quilt around and try to get some of these that I may not have in my quilt spaced out through it. So I'm going to work on that. I'm going to work on moving everything and making sure I have everything nice and balanced. And then with these blocks here, if I have enough, I may make a wall hanging, or I can sew 4 of the blocks together and make a throw pillow or different things like that. But like I said, what we're going to do right now is work through the quilt here and balance all the dark and light pieces a little bit better. So as I work through the quilt, I'm noticing that there are not as many of these dark yellow blocks as I would like. And since I have a few extra blocks that do have more of that darker yellow, I'm going to figure out which blocks on the quilt I could switch out for more of this dark yellow to come through. So I'm looking in this one, although the Be Happy writing is really cute, I do have some other blocks still in that have that on it, even in this gray color. So I'm going to move one of those out. I'm going to still keep one, but I'm going to add this one in. And these bees are so cute anyway, so we definitely need to have that in here. And since I have some other blocks with the dark writing on it, I'm going to switch that one out. And I'm just going to go through and do that and keep moving blocks around to make sure I don't have two of the same blocks. I'm going to switch this block out because I don't have any with this gray design in it. And I really want to get some of that in here. I love this honeycomb. So I'm just going to keep working through and seeing where I can just make little improvements. This one does have a bee theme with the little beehive, but it doesn't stand out as much as the honeycomb. So I'm going to put that one in there. I will rearrange it because I don't want these two next to each other, but I'm just getting some of these blocks how I like them. So just keep working through like that. I'm going to switch this one, I think, and bring in the darker honeycomb just because it'll bring out some more of that darker color that I'm missing. So yeah, I think getting this one in because I really love this gray believe in yourself writing. So I'm gonna see, I think I might switch out that one. And I'm still going to use these blocks that I'm moving out. It's not like they're not going to get used. I'm going to use them for another project that I'm going to show. It's just more arranging this in a way that makes sense. That looks good, has a nice balance to it. And I'll just keep moving these around. Get it to a place where I really like it and I'm happy with it. Lift this up a little bit. And it might take a while. You might have to move it quite a bit before it gets to a way that you are completely happy with it. Okay, so now you're going to need some pins and some row markers. So I'm going to consider this row up here my row 1. So I'm going to place a little piece of paper that says 1 on it there, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So these are the start of each of my rows. This is the start of row 1, row 2. I'm going to pin number of each rows on so that it does not fall off. And then I'm going to stack each of my rows. And this is just so, you know, I know what order they're all in, because I have a dog, I have 2 kids, I have a husband. I can't leave this laying on my floor all day long because people will walk over it and it'll possibly mess up my rows. So I go ahead and I stack them. So I start with the row that's marked and I put that on top of the next one. And then I pick up those 2 and put it on top of the next one. Pick up all those, put it on top of the next one, and keep going. Okay? So I'm going to do that for all of these rows. Okay, so now I'm going to start with my row 1 and stack it on top of row 2, row 3, take all those, stack it on row 4, say all those and rack them, stack on 5, take all those, stack on 6, on 7, and on 8. Okay, so now I have a pile of all of my blocks. Okay, so we have our stack of blocks here divided out by rows. So what you're going to do is take the top block of the first row and flip it so both sides are facing each other. And then I'm going to pin the seams because I like at the very least, pinning my seams. Okay. So I have that top block of row 1 facing together with the second block on row 1. And I pin the seams. So now I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. I like to move my needle all the way over as far as it goes on the presser foot so I can just run the edge of the presser foot along. And I'm going to sew these 2 blocks together. You got to take that needle out to be able to look at it. Okay, so this is why I marked the first block, because you see how my 1 ended up over here? So now I know that is still the first block I started my row with. This is block 2. So now I'll take the 3rd block in this row, flip them facing each other, line up the seams and pin it, and sew a 1/4 inch seam here. So like I said, I always at least pin at the seam. You could put more pins across here to keep everything straight if you want to. That is totally up to you. But this is how we're going to keep working this row. Okay, so I sewed that 1/4 inch seam, remove my needle at the seam. And then that's how we know that that was the first block we did. This is our row so far. So we have 1, 2, 3 sewn on. We'll have 3 more because we did 6. So I'm going to grab that next block. And I'm going to place it on here. We're going to do right sides facing together, the design pretty side facing together. I'm going to make sure my seams are meeting. Put in a pin. And then we're going to sew that 1/4 inch seam. Now, you're going to go ahead and do this for this block and the next 2. Okay, so if you missed counting the blocks or anything like that, you don't have to worry about accidentally sewing the first block on row 2 onto row 1 because you marked them all. So that's why I like marking the rows, because you don't have to worry about, okay, when I stack these, do I have 6 here? You don't have to worry about miscounting. You will know right away that you got to your second row. So I'm going to flip my second block in row 2 onto the first block in row 2, and I'm going to make sure to pin this side at the seam, and then I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance onto this block. I just heard a pin drop, so I'm going to grab it real quick before I forget about it. Don't want my dog to try to eat it or myself to step on it. So we're going to work through this row as well. So the reason I love this so much, marking these rows, because when I flip this open, I automatically know that I am not sewing my next block over here. I am going to sew it onto this one. So block 3 is getting sewn on here. So I'm going to keep working through all of these. Wow, just like that, we finished row 1 and row 2, and we're already starting row 3, and because it's marked, we know when to start a new row. So I'm going to work through all the rest of these rows, sewing them together just like I did 1 and 2. I'm going to move the top first block of row 1 to the side, flip the second one onto it, meet the seams, pin it, and sew a 1/4 inch seam. So if you have decided to grab some fabric and work along, go ahead and sew all of these rows together, and then we will press all of the seams open that we just sewed, make sure everything is nice and pressed, and then we'll meet back on the floor to lay them all out again. So hey, strips are all sewn together. They are super cute, and I've already pressed them with my iron. So let's head back to the floor and get them all laid out in the correct order. Okay, so let's get these all laid out. We're gonna start with row 1, row 2, row 3, 4, and if we did everything correctly, everything should be meeting up nicely. Five, 6, 7, and then 8. Okay, so it looks like everything turned out great. If anything wasn't meeting up right, meaning you ended up with 2 darks together, then the only thing you can do is be okay with it or rip seams. And those are pretty much your only 2 options. But right now everything looks great. I love that method that I used of stacking everything together and labeling the first rows. So we're still going to use those labels to sew these rows together. I'm going to pin along my seams. So it's going to require a lot more pins to keep them meeting up, but I'm telling you, it is really worth it for getting all the seams to match nicely. Okay, so I have row 1 and 2 here, and we're going to sew them together along the line we pinned. And we're going to do this just like any other sewing that we have done with a 1/4 inch seam. Now, since there's so many pins along here, I'm going to remove them as I go. Okay, so I've sewn row 1 onto row 2. So what I'm going to do is I have row 3 here. See? So I'm going to put the right sides together, and I'm going to pin along these seams and sew again a 1/4 inch seam along there. So pin, pin, pin all those seams, and then we'll sew row 2 and row 3 together. And then we're going to keep doing this for all 8 of those rows, and once we've done that, we'll have the top of our quilt finished. Okay, so row 2 and 3 are pinned together, so let's sew them with our 1/4 inch seam all the way down the row. So the fun thing about this part is that these are such long rows that it makes quick work of sewing them, because you don't have to stop and cut and all that. So you just sew down it And at this point, you'll just be so surprised at how quickly your quilt comes together. So at this point of your quilt, you're just going to continue doing this. After you're done sewing here, you're going to put row 4 on top of this row 3. You're going to pin all of the seams. And you're going to sew the length of the row, and you're going to do that with row 4 through 8, and then anybody want to guess what you do next? You are going to press all those seams. So you're going to iron the top of your quilt so everything lays nice and flat, because that's pretty much what you always do. It's one of the most important parts of quilting is ironing, ironing, ironing. I think I left, yeah. Sometimes I forget to grab those pins, and then when I open my quilt, I'm like, why isn't this laying open nice? So look at that. Look how far we are done with this quilt. It is looking so beautiful. So excited about it. So like I said, we have done rows 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, 3. So we have 4 through 8 that we want to add on, and we're going to go through that same process, press the quilt, and then we'll meet back here and talk about what the next steps to our quilt. Okay, check out the quilt. Oh my goodness, it came together so fast, and I'm so happy with how it looks. I love it. So beautiful. And I already pressed it, so I ironed all the seams that we just sewed. And now it's just ready to go. It's ready to baste. So I'm just gonna remove all of my row markers. I don't need those anymore. And I'm gonna get together the batting that I'm gonna use and the backing fabric, which I've already purchased. So if you haven't already subscribed to my channel and you want some tips on basting a quilt, go ahead and subscribe now so that you'll be notified when that video posts. And if you've been quilting along with me, just so you know, here are the supplies that you will need. You will need that batting that I talked about. The one I got here is just from Walmart. It was a great price. I think it was around $12, somewhere around there. I actually just got it today, so I should know. So it's an 80-20. It's a quilt batting. This size is medium because I needed a size that would fit this throw-sized blanket that I made. And the dimensions on this one is 72 inches by 90 inches, so it's a bit bigger than I need, but what I do is just cut it down, and I use the extra for if I quilt some coasters or pot holders, things like that. The extra batting is perfect. And then I grabbed some 100% cotton fabric from Walmart as well. As you can see, it's not going to be quite wide enough for my quilt. So I'll need to cut this to size, and what I'm going to do is save some of the rest on the ends. I'm going to cut off, and I'm going to use that for my binding that I'm going to have to piece together for my quilt. So the next video is going to be all about basting your quilt, getting all those layers together. After that, the next video is going to be actually quilting it. And then we're gonna do that binding portion. But I will show you how I cut the strips for the binding. It's just not gonna be in the next video. We're just gonna save that extra fabric. So, thanks you guys for watching. Like I said, be sure to subscribe. Be sure to comment if you have any questions. And I look forward to seeing you next time to quilt more together.